Good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? My guest tonight was a very successful reporter for WVIT Channel 30 for many years prior to his retirement. During that time, he broke many important stories that happened in and around various towns in Connecticut. His accuracy, honesty, and bare-bones style were his trademark. However, the story of his life is a fascinating look behind the scenes at a life filled with struggle, pain, failure, and ultimate success. It is also the story of a man whose deep personal faith sustained and carried him through a gauntlet of life's toughest trials and tribulations. This is part 2 of my interview with the beloved Lou Brown.
Too kind, my brother. You're too kind. God bless you.
Now, Lou, when we stopped part 1, you were talking about going to school.
Going to camp, summer camp.
Summer camp, excuse me.
Yeah.
You were going to camp.
Camp Harkness.
Camp Harkness, okay.
Down in Waterford, Connecticut.
All right.
Now, imagine it being a kid raised in a public housing development.
Okay.
But because of my illness,
All right.
physically, I attended that estate down there in New London. And one of the papers I did write when I was attended U of H, Doug Wardwell, he, God rest his soul, was my instructor. But I wrote a paper, and like seeing the heat from the street, you could see it rise up during the summer months.
Oh, yes.
But because of my illness,
Yep.
I was allowed to go to Harkness Memorial State Park. It was a cerebral palsy at that time. But the point being, can you imagine the difference, the extremes down there by the water and the sea? Sound like something for, what's that down by the sea?
Yeah.
Who was that?
Somewhere down by the sea.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I attended 2 years down there.
So from ages, what, 12 to 14?
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
And it was and coming back home, I attended the Naylor School down at, like I said, down the south end. But I attended my senior year was I went to Northeast Junior High School, Little Time Arsenal School, then to Naylor School Elementary, then to Northeast Junior High School, which is in the north end. And then I had my heart set on going to Weaver High School.
I want to be a Weaver Beaver.
Weaver Beaver. But they changed the zones around. And I had to go to Hartford Public High School. It was kind of a cultural shock for me and many of my colleagues from Bellevue Square, the way the lines were cut. And there was some speculation as to why that was done. And I won't talk about that as an urban tale, but I know what happened when I went to Hartford High with Thomas Quirk and the staff there at Hartford High. At that time, many of the teachers were relatively, they would be on a college campus. We had a solid, because there was a commitment in this city to educate. There were no throwaways per se. Now you had some ignorance there.
Sure, you're always going to have that.
You're going to have that.
Yes.
You're going to have that. But the African American community at the time insisted that you go to school. Do you hear what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying.
From the community.
Yep.
In fact, there's a fraternity, Kappa Diem, which is now not operating. But one of the things was that to stay in school, to stay in high school, to stay in school, because you remember many of the families brought that from the South to help support the family. You went to work early. And as I'm talking, it's the American story, your introduction. It's the American story. There are very few of us who are born with silver spoons in our mouths.
Some of us got no spoons at all.
None at all.
That's right.
And because of re-examining the ugly head of racism.
Absolutely.
Race matters in our society.
It does.
Hey, somebody had got to confront the gorilla
In the room.
in a telephone booth.
Yeah. In the telephone booth.
In the telephone booth. But I have no regrets. I mean, Hartford, fond memories.
Yes. One of the things you said to me when I interviewed you initially was you are imbued with a deep personal faith. And I asked you, where did that faith come from and how has it sustained you? Would you please share that with our viewing
Without
audience?
question. My family, the roots, the church, something in us. Now, I say to you, and I'm just sitting here looking at you and thinking about it, Jim, to my doctors, to my family, I was ill. I never thought ill. My faith sustained me. I mean, when you're a preteen in that hospital, in a bed, at Hartford Hospital, by yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Isolation.
Oh, yeah.
And my birth name is William Moses Brown. I'm going to say that again.
All right.
William Moses Brown. So my faith, and I start thinking about Moses. Even in terms of when I went to the media, never thought I would, and you read about Moses, Moses had a lisp. He had a speaking problem.
That's why they sent Aaron with him.
So what I'm saying to you is that my faith, and I say now when people pass on, our hearts are heavy, but our faith will sustain us. Faith, you gotta have faith and hope. And even today, quoting Cornell West, he has a book out. You gotta hope. You gotta keep the faith and the hope, even when hope, H-O-P-E, is on a tight rope.
Dr. King said, when you stop hoping, you die.
And it's a matter of rising to the human level.
Following that train of thought, Lou, you said to me, and I'm quoting now, I am blessed and I know it. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, so many of us are blessed, and woe's me, my finger hurt. I don't have anything to eat. You ready? Hey, my father worked in a foundry with 9. I would ask my siblings, would you have 9, 10 kids, man? Are you crazy? So everything is relative.
Yes.
But if you want to sit around and moan and groan, it's not being Pollyanna about it. Man, I come from an environment where there were the gangs and the whole 9 yards. And they're my friends and still my friends. I love my brothers. Because one thing that I remember with them, just like with my teachers and the adults around me, they would look out for me because of my illnesses. I was small.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And when I graduated from high school, I was 4'11", soaking wet. 99 pounds.
I was going to say 98 pounds, yeah, 99.
And all, you know, my friends were, they looked at, and we were all, there's a fellow by God rest his soul by the name Asa Boyd. Asa Boyd was streetwise. He had an expression. We were all angels with dirty faces. Some get over the fence, some don't. Many of my brothers and sisters helped me over that fence. So I would.
You made it.
And my immediate family, my brother Calvin, God rest his soul.
Sure.
My brother Calvin, my brother John, my brother Richard.
All of them helped.
All you know, John, Richard,
Gotcha.
Calvin helped me over the fence. Did I miss anybody? No. Henny, Jesus Christ.
Let's talk about your career. I understand you were a letter carrier.
I carried mail.
Was the bag bigger than you, Lou?
The bag was bigger than me, and the bag was one whereby I need to slow down. I forget my brother Henry, God rest his soul. I took the test, the exam, passed it, and it was a matter of, they made me a clerk. I clerked, and the night, I don't know if you remember when the lights went out on the East Coast.
New York, yeah, I remember it was dark, yeah, I remember.
I was throwing mail, and I was a little tipsy. I think it might have been from the, no, but anyhow, I said, yeah, no, this is me.
Yeah.
I went up to personnel and said, the guy says, no, Lou, stay here. And he said, stay here. Why don't you carry? I loved carrying mail. I loved Branch 86, the Hartford District.
How long did you do that as a carrier?
10 years.
10 years as a carrier with the post office.
And at that time, we used to carry the flats in our arm. They call them flats of magazines and whatnot. And depends on where you worked at. My arm, this arm was like, you ever see tennis players when the arm that they use, the hand that they use, it's bigger or even longer? That was me.
Now tell us about, you were in the Air Force. What happened with that, Lou?
Well, what happened was that I was determined to join the Air Force in the 60s. And what happened was, after I graduated, it was a choice. I had to, find a job.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
So I joined the Air Force, U.S. Air Force. I went and took the test. In New Haven, you took the test down there, the physical and the whole 9 yards and the coffin. But what happened was I passed. And I went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. My first time on a plane. But down there, first time in my life, 18 years of it. So we go down to, and I'm running around the PT field, the physical training field. A Jeep pulls up, 2 guys from Lackland Air Force Base. Said, Brown, you're going to the hospital. He checked out. I'm running around the PT field. And I was I must say that I was a little pleased because that's where I ran to Dr. Pepper.
Okay.
The soda machine, right?
All right, yeah.
Anyhow, around the base, you couldn't stop. Go to and the doctor says to me, Brown, how'd you get in there? I looked around and said, what do you mean, how did I get in there? Like everybody else. Took the test, the exam, and I said, if you check the record, I told you everything. I said, well, son, we're going to give you a discharge. I got a little upset. We're going to give you an honorable discharge. We see that you're where your heart is at. And I had not lied, but whoever did the background check it caught up with him finally in my medical record. Can you imagine looking at my medical record? Rheumatic fever, liver trouble, heart trouble, kidney trouble, and couldn't attend regular classes and the whole thing. Well, they didn't do their homework, and when they finally realized that, once again, my theme, my mantra, I'm blessed and I know it. I passed the test. I didn't lie to get in. What drove me, not just my patriotism. My patriotism.
There's no such thing as black or white patriotism, is it?
Not when you know what this real story is, when you read the books in reference to the Civil War and so on and so forth. And it angers me today when anyone questions the patriotism of African Americans in this country. No blame game. No blame game, but when you Tuskegee Airmen and so on and so forth, and when you at 77, there's a friend of mine by the name of Bill Costin, C-O-S-T-E-N, his cultural exhibit. You learn, not just the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh, yeah. So many.
The exploits of individuals, and so it's coming out now.
Yep.
400 years after.
After the fact. Dick Robinson School of Broadcasting.
Loved it.
What were you doing there?
Well, what happened was I was delivering mail, Jim, and I delivered mail. Hartford's my home. In the greater Hartford area, but in Hartford, you know, I'm a Hartford kid,
Okay.
through and
All right.
through.
Through and through.
The original barrio, predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood in Hartford was in the North End,
Okay.
not down the South. It was the North End.
Okay.
But the point I'm making is that I saw something on the street. What I saw on the street that morning, not necessarily anti anybody, but I said that's not how it happened. At that time, Dick Robinson. And at that time, around the same time, WKND radio.
We'll get to that. Oh, yeah.
I used to. So what happened was that I went. That's why I got to Dickie Robinson, and I auditioned.
So you saw an event that happened on the street.
On the streets.
With your own eyes.
With my own eyes.
And then you saw it reported in the media, and it was
that
not
night.
When it was not what you saw.
It was not what I saw.
And that drove you to want to go.
That made me. Of course, then there were many things going on, the civil rights era.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so on and so forth.
Yes. Yeah.
And but that's what motivated me. I went from Dickie Robinson at the same time. Attended for 6 months University of Hartford School of Journalism. The instructor I had, or the professor I had, Doug Wardwell, W-A-R-D-W-E-L-L, he passed recently, and he had ended up going over to Central, but he kind of saw something in me, you know, and then of course at WKND Radio with the state's only black radio station, but like typical radio station at that time, to the right of the dial, daytimers. But
how did you get to WKND?
Because they were starting up anew, and things just happened, and I walked in and said, you know, I'd like to come to work for you. The guy says, you're not radio voice material. You know, you're not.
Everybody can't sound like Jim Reed.
Your name is not Jim Reed. So therefore I said, man, listen. And of course there was a stigma at that time. And I'm glad that it's no longer in existence, that you were trying to sound white. Such nonsense.
Oh, such nonsense.
Such nonsense, man.
Yeah.
And I say that in all due respect.
In all due respect, absolutely.
Such nonsense, you know. But we fell for it, just like we fell for the whole. You talk about the church, and the White Branch talked about the church and in the vanguard of the civil rights movement. We come out calling ministers Uncle Tom and this and all that jazz. Nonsense, such nonsense. But the point being is that it was pure nonsense. The issue was more about stations like in Boston, ILD, or New York being to the right of the dial and 500 watts daytimers. That was a real issue, in my opinion.
And you met some of your closest friends at WPOP, didn't you?
Oh,
a fellow by the name of Jerry something?
At that time, WPOP was like a farm team for the major league.
Okay, all right.
And it was all news.
AAA?
Oh man, it was, and like Brian Garnett, God rest his soul, came through there. Joanne Nessie came at different times though. Lloyd Wimbish came through WKND and WPOP.
I remember Lloyd Wimbish.
Oh my man.
I do.
He and I are very close to this day, and we meet often and sit down and talk about those days. Lloyd worked was an ambition, but some things are preordained. Lloyd left a job at the light company, Reader, I think, to work at WKND Radio. And the same way with myself at the post office. But I want a little more security, and
sure.
I was not as good as Lloyd, though.
Okay.
Lloyd was top notch, man.
Speaking of that, you have said that your own self, when I interviewed you, that you didn't think you were television material when you joined Channel 30.
Right.
You thought that, not me.
Right. And in fact, it was people like Jerry Toney, who worked at 3. They offered him the job first, so the story goes, at Channel 30.
Yep.
At that time, they're changing management, no longer locally owned Summit Redstone, and they wanted to grab the city. They want, the I guess you call it the bread and butter.
Yep, that you delivered.
I delivered.
All right.
And walked in, and that's why they want it. And the first television station outside of Boston, news department, to win the Emmy, the first when I was there. I'm not saying we had a team, but being born and raised in the city.
You had contacts.
I had more than you could imagine.
Carter got liver pills.
Oh man, and then of course the time, the civil rights movement.
Yep.
That whole thing, and that was at WKND radio though. My photo array, it speaks to it, from Jesse Jackson to
Sure.
Dr. Maya
Shirley
Angelou,
Chisholm.
and Nikki Giovanni.
Yes,
And on and on and on, and in those cases, it was always learning, just like the teachers, my teachers, all through school.
You told me that you spent time learning to pronounce words.
Yes.
And how did you work that out?
Well, I had and today, ironically enough, I had a hearing problem.
Okay.
You sound, you hear, you don't sound to others like you sound to yourself.
Oh, absolutely right, yes.
I was at Channel 30 where I had a speech coach, but also that they paid for. But the late Mrs. Johnson, Art Johnson's wife, I can't remember her first name, but
yeah.
she worked for the state. She articulation and
okay.
But
you swallowed your words, is what you told me.
yeah, well, and that's an issue. I don't know if if it's because of my ailment with my ear. In fact, I have an ear issue today.
Okay, all right.
And and then when you're rushing, so it's relaxing and listen to yourself, and that got me over, and I stopped rushing, and then of course with the stories I was breaking.
Yes, just put it over the top.
Put me over the top. I had more sources than Carter had. Like I said, Carter had Liverpool, but what it meant was that sometimes, and I'll say it, I'll blow my own. In a newscast, I had 3 stories in one newscast. And made my page.
All right. Listen to me. This has been an absolute fascinating hour with you, Mr. Lou Brown.
My pleasure indeed.
Thank you so very much for coming here.
Mr. James Ransom
Reed Jr.
Reed.
There you go,
Jr.
buddy. All righty.
All right.
That's all the time we have for tonight's show. My thanks to my guest, Lou Brown. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, good night.